My name is Scherner de la Fuente. I have been a junior engineer at Living Social for 1 year as of last week, and thank you. I have been a professional engineer for 1 year, and I'm short, as of last week, and I've been short for much longer than I've been an engineer. My Twitter account is Media Remedial, and the solicitation part of this greeting is that I would love for you to visit Goat User Stories, where I have been tweeting for a little while now. And I put out a Rocky Mountain Ruby one today earlier. I mean, Hazel, my goat friend, put that out a little bit earlier today. So I solicit you to go check it out. In any case, my talk today is called I Like My Params Like I Like My Coffee, which is strong, in case anybody was wondering. Although for the application that I work in, I had to change about 25 models and controllers, today I'm just going to talk about a few of the very little documented tips that I gathered from working on one model and its 1,000+ line controller. You wouldn't want to get in there. I'm also going to tell you a bit about a months-long mystery which prevented strong params from really working on that controller, and how the solution to that mystery ended up being intricately tied to my coffee theme, which was not planned even when the talk was accepted. We still hadn't solved the mystery, but it's solved now, so stick around. So just a quick overview of strong parameters if you haven't used them. We worked with the strong parameters gem because we were in Rails 3.0 and then eventually moved to Rails 3.2, but you've got to use the gem. So basically when you've got that gem installed, you will have that include line there and on any model that you want to apply the strong parameters to. And then on the controller, this is the very basic outline of what your new private method will use that will implement these strong params. It's basically params.require, your model in parentheses, .permit, and whatever attributes you would like to be able to pass in. And the idea of strong parameters is so that people can't, inject inappropriate things when they're using your application. And then usually, again, very basic, in your create or update method, you would replace params model in brackets with your new method. So that's just a quick overview in case you haven't done that before. This scary thing, you're not supposed to be able to read that stuff in the background, by the way. But this is a screenshot of the coffee controller. It's actually not the controller, it's the attributes. And I should take this microphone. Okay, I'm switching. Right over there, that's params.require, the model, and all of these up to here are all attributes blurred directly on the coffee model. And then starting here, I actually know this, which is awful, are nested parameters. And they would go on for about 4 or 5 slides if I were to show you them all. So you can imagine why it took a while to get this all set up. Now I'm not walking anymore. Okay. So I have all this, and in order to figure out what attributes needed to be on here, I alphabetized all of them directly on the mod or on the controller in these attribute sections, and then all of the nested parameters alphabetized, and that was a pain in the ass. And but it allowed me to take the raw parameters and compare them and figure out and make sure I had all the attributes in the right spot. And I figured people who came after me would easily be able to figure out where to add things and where to subtract them. So I put that PR in. I'd been doing strong parameters for a couple of months on other models and controllers at this point, but this is what happened. It did not go well at all. And one of the key things that I learned from this experience of putting out a complicated model and controller is that it is a great idea, and this is my first tip that is a little document, but I think it's pretty straightforward, is that when you are putting in a complicated model and controller, and heck, even when you're doing strong parameters on a simple one, start by permitting all of your attributes. And you do that with a permit bang, and then all of your attributes are allowed. Then you can make sure your code works everywhere else whether or not you've got the right list of attributes or not. Then you can release the attributes. And if you're turning in a 1,000+ line controller, and it's an internal application, so little risk, maybe you put that out there with the permit bang, and then you come back and figure out what attributes need to go in. So I did learn that. And then the next day, I did manage to get the strong parameters on the coffee controller. And that was amazing that it was only the next day. I can't believe that happened. But it did, and here are some of the, again, not well documented things that I learned as part of that project, which is, and I still haven't found documentation on this, but there are times where you will have your private method listed with your strong parameters, including, in our case, the cafe account nested attributes, and you might still need to permit them separately within a method. In our case, it's the create method. And just like I did a permit bang on the private method on this controller, I also did it within the create method. But that's something to watch out for, that you may need to list the params again separately within a method. Don't be alarmed. Okay, the next thing is a total newbie mistake, and I would like to thank Colin for helping me figure this out. But early on, I was a junior developer, and I replaced all of the params brackets with my new method. And strong parameters is only there to prevent people from injecting code. Nobody's injecting code when you're deleting. No one cares. Strong parameters definitely doesn't care. So we didn't realize this until last month, but the attributes we thought would be deleted were not being deleted, because strong params doesn't do that. It doesn't care that you're deleting something, and it won't do it for you. So don't replace the params model with your new method. And then finally, we learned in some of the tests, they happen to be API tests. Because what I didn't say is this controller, we also had 3 API controllers and I think one other miscellaneous controller. Anyway, we learned in there when we were trying, for various reasons, we would be passing in an empty hash for the object, in this case the coffee object, and running an update. Sometimes we wanted to make sure the right error code was coming through, and before strong params, you would expect a 204 or a no content error. But once strong params is in, it'll give you a 400, just a plain old bad request. And you need to know that when you get that 400 error, that it's not an error, it's the thing that it's supposed to pass with an empty hash. But you might also be just needing to pass the object in so you can run update. Strong params will not let you do that if you've got a params.require on the controller. So you need to put some attribute in that hash if the idea is not to get an error message. And it can't be foo or bar, it's gotta be an actual attribute that you're gonna have on your controller. So those were the tips that I learned there. And then, so I learned things, but then I kept trying to put out the coffee controller with the attributes instead of the permit bang. And this happened for quite a while. In fact, in our Slack channel for our application, they created an emoji for what I was doing. It was a bowl, and they cut strong like bowl. And so it started as people were teasing me about going for a revert record. There were actually a total of 11 reverts on the 55 PRs it took to do the whole code base. So people were joking about how I was going for a revert record, which is really good for a junior engineer's ego. So originally it started with, Tara, your params are a little too strong like bull, with the cute little bull emoji. Eventually it did say things like Tara's strong like bull params are working, but with a surprise tone, which was still kind of damaging to my ego, but I took it. Let me back up just for a minute. Actually, no, I'll go ahead and give it a shot. But look what I was working with. No wonder I had the strong like bull emoji going on. This is, again, about a quarter or maybe a fifth of the raw parameters that would come through when we did an update on this particular controller. And yes, we're all very sorry. But where I kept running into an error was in these run span attributes. And no matter what, I did. I could not get them to work. I have taken the raw parameters hash and spent days doing it maybe 10 to 20 times, putting cursors after all the braces and the commas and making sure I had everything nested properly, because we have deep nested attributes on this controller. We have a set of attributes called additional attributes attributes, and I am not lying about that. And see, they're laughing because they know the additional attributes attributes. They are in there. So I was sure the reason I couldn't get these attributes on is because I had a nesting problem. So I kept trying to find it. I kept not finding it. I had all the attributes. I had my alphabetical list in the code base, and I had all the attributes, including the ones that were going horribly wrong down here. I was just sure something awful was going on. And it was, because I couldn't get I couldn't unbang those permits. So some of you may be wondering, why didn't she use that really awesome gem that's out now, where you run the gem through your code base and or your controller, and it tells you what attributes to do and how to nest them. And this is why. Because right about that same time, Andrew Hunter, one of the lead software engineers at Living Social, was working on strong parameters and that particular gem. And so we got together in that same Slack channel, and he shared his code with me, but I already had my hash of attributes, and I shared with him that scary raw parameters thing, and he used that to make the gem strong like bull. Guess where it was named after? It was named after my emoji. And so it has now been downloaded over 300 times, and it seems to be working for folks, so I'm real happy that my torment could lead to your success. Andrew wrote a really great article that was published on our tech blog at Living Social. You don't have to copy that down, because I set up my Twitter account to tweet it. So it should be tweeting right around now. And so I strongly recommend you go check it out. Even if you're not interested in the gem, it tells you a lot of concise information about strong params and how they work. So that's why I didn't use it. Oh, there's a cat. So here is another good thing that I did, which I would include as a tip, because I was so concerned about the nesting of those deep nested parameters. I set up just a Poro file in our lib folder, which is just straight up constants with arrays of the parameters, again, alphabetical, so I could sort those guys out. And then when I had something nested, like those first two are just listed with their attributes, then when I had options attributes, which have those within them, I could literally just point to the constant, and that made for a much easier read. It makes for a much easier way to add or delete attributes, and it's also cleaner on the controller itself. So I would recommend something like this. Believe me, it's much longer in real life. Okay, so then, finally, I got all of the models controllers in there, even if I still had the permit bang on the coffee controller. And at that point, I was able to fix things on the fly. That's the cat. Any excuse to put a cat. And so I built a test that would test for that particular run span error I kept finding. It would pass in the version with the permit bang. It would not pass in the version with my awesome attributes that looked so good but wouldn't go out. So fortunately, back in November at RubyConf, I met our lead engineer, Dan Rabinowitz, who I was only 2 months of engineering at that point under my belt. And he graciously offered to pair with me sometime, even though he doesn't work on this application. And as I heard him say to somebody else earlier, she was new. What could she possibly be working on that was difficult? This will take 20 minutes. Yeah, so we spent 2 months together working on this project. And it took 2 months because Dan doesn't work on this application, and he's in charge of important things. So we would meet every so often, and we would make notes about what we did and what we were going to do next. And this is our very first one. We have no clue was the heading at the top of our notes, and we didn't. And we had a little bit of our stack trace. We had some clues about where we were going next. All of our notes ended with why. Yeah, they didn't. So we met a few more times, and we would work for an hour or two periodically every few weeks. I would work with nobody else because I'd tried with a few senior engineers, but we would spend an hour to an hour and a half getting to all the places in the code where I knew things were already going wrong. Oops, sorry about that. And we would get there, and then they would stop. They'd be like, they weren't interested in the problem, I think because time zones were involved. Nobody likes time zones. So I stuck with Dan because he'd volunteered, damn it. And then July 26th came, and the talk I'm giving right now was accepted. And I still had permit bang on the biggest controller in our code base. So I told Dan the talk had been accepted. He was real happy for me. I'm like, Dan, we need to meet. So the next day, thank God, he had some time, and we did meet. And we were running the tests right next to each other, and Dan said something that I know he'd said before, and we both ignored it multiple times. He said, you know, we got to the point where the stack traces changed, and he's like, the only thing I see that's different is that the raw parameters are different from the parameters that are passed through when you've got all the attributes listed specifically. And he said that, but I'd been used to that. I had that long stack of raw parameters. I was always comparing that to my code base, which was in alphabetical order. But he said it, and I finally heard it. And I was in the middle of a Ruby book club at Living Social, and we were reading Eloquent Ruby by Russ Olson. And I was like, Dan, I remember something. I'm like, order matters. It matters. And so I had the book right there, and I pull it up. And here is how it's amazing that I chose this theme. Because here was the quote I read to Dan. Order and arrays go together like coders and coffee. With the advent of Ruby 1.9, however, hashes have become firmly ordered, which we never, at least I never think about. You know, if you have a key, you have a value. If you have a value, you have the key. And you don't have to think about order, but you damn sure do in strong parameters, at least in this particular case. And the reason is because we had overloaded an active record method, which Dan and I did not realize at the time, but we did. So Dan works here in Boulder or in that area, this area, and I work in Portland, Oregon. And he had basically been the driver in our pairing sessions because he knows all the shortcuts and can do amazing logging things really fast, and I cannot. But I basically pushed him away from the keyboard and went over to my lib file with the constants and all that, and with 4 clicks, after months of looking at this problem, I moved time zone name from its alphabetical position to the front of the line, except I always had ID in the front, destroy in the end. I moved it, we ran the test, everything passed. And the next day, I turned in the code, and for the first time in a long time, it was not reverted. And it remains there to this day. I love that I get applause for about 4 clicks. There was a copy and a paste. It was awesome. Yeah, so just to quickly recap, whitelisting all the attributes before you list them individually can help you focus on the necessary code changes required before you worry about what attributes you need. A list of nested parameters might be required within a method. Just like there's no crying in baseball, there is no deleting in strong parameters. Learn from my mistake. No empty object hashes in tests unless you're looking for a 400 error. Order can totally matter. And pairing is an opportunity to succeed and learn for everyone. And junior developers have unbridled enthusiasm for tedium. Please use them. And thank you for being my first tech audience. I really appreciate it.